Experts by experience. Real conversations, real people, real stories.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of our Experts by Experience podcast. I've got a couple of guests with me here today, and we're going to be talking about disclosures, when to do them, how it feels to do them, disclosing a conviction to a new employer, and some of the guidelines that we can base our decisions and actions around when we're doing this. I've got two guests with me here today. First of all, Rik, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rik from Offploy. I'm the training and advocacy manager, and I've got some lived experience myself, but I joined Offploy coming up about 6 years ago now.
Lovely. Thank you, Rik. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
And Darren, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, I'm Darren. I'm here because I've got lived experience as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much, guys. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to start with talking about the hesitancy that people have to disclose a conviction. And this question is for either of you. Could you recall a time where you were hesitant to disclose something about yourself? So that could be a conviction or otherwise. And can you talk a little bit about what held you back?
So for me, just to give some context, I've served 2 custodial sentences. One was 2.5 years for violent disorder, and one was a 3-month sentence. That was when I was 21. I received the custodial sentences. I'd come out after the second sentence of 3 months, and I'd been doing labouring jobs. Before custody, I'd done a bit of administration, and decided that I preferred that sort of work over general labouring. You know, it's horses for courses, isn't it? People like what they like. But I didn't get any sort of success with any applications when I was putting in my criminal record on my application forms. So what I did as a first part is I took out the 15-month that I served in prison off of my CV, and I just filled it with a labouring job. So nothing spectacular necessarily that would get me an office job, but it just filled the gap. I then got an interview and got a job, and it was in the public sector in like Whitehall, and it was a really junior position. And on the first day, following all the recruitment exercise, on the first day I got given a criminal record disclosure form. And I'd literally only been there for 10 minutes. And so I was then torn between saying yes and thinking they're going to escort me out of the building, or just no and getting the chance for them to get to know me. So I ticked the no box. So that's what held me back was my previous experience of not getting any success when I was declaring a criminal record. And then because of what the criminal convictions were for, I just thought they'd walk me out the door. So I decided not to declare it. It became apparent 3 months later through employment checks that I'd actually served a custodial sentence. And by that time, I'd worked there for 3 months. So my bosses had got to know me a little bit. And then they supported me to stay on at the organisation. So I suppose that's a good starting point, and maybe lead into Rik. I don't know. Have you got any views on that, Rik?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough one because there's 2 things, I guess, that hold people back. One is nobody, in my experience, is ever told in the criminal justice system what they have to disclose and up to what point. In other words, when it becomes spent, you're just not told. Nobody tells you from sentencing through to release, etc. And the law says that if you've got a criminal record and you're asked and it's unspent, you must disclose it. It is a legal requirement to do that. but people do not have that properly explained to them. And therefore, I think a lot of people do what you've just described, Darren, where perhaps they're not totally upfront in terms of what's happened because they're worried about the consequences. But then other people do the reverse. Some people continue disclosing everything even after the time when they need to, because actually it's spent and they don't have to. And I think it's a flaw in the criminal justice system that there's a lot of legal requirements for people to do certain things, but very, very rarely, if ever, is actually that properly explained. And it's only when you come on one of the support programs that's run by Catch-22 or Offploy or organizations like us that perhaps you get talked through the best way of disclosing, what you need to disclose and for how long. So I think I would always have to, from my point of view, advise that if you're asked, you have to disclose up to the point the conviction is spent, unless obviously enhanced DBS, even if it's spent, you have to disclose. But I totally understand. It obviously opened a door for you, Darren, that probably wouldn't have been open otherwise.
So yeah, you were saying, Rik, that you really understand the hesitancy of people disclosing their conviction, and a lot of that sounded like it's based in like people being underinformed, the general public being underinformed, right, of what the processes look like and what that has to look like. Can you talk a bit about the work that you do at Offploy to kind of combat that?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I mean, I think there's a number of things that we will do. Anybody that's referred on one of our programs that we run, we will go through a number of things, including employability skills and tackling any barriers and obstacles they have. But a key part of the program is around disclosure, and it is understanding the convictions that an individual has, explaining to them the legal consequences of those convictions. So, perhaps what the restrictions mean. At Offploy, we've put together this Disclosure Toolkit you've probably heard me talk about before, which is a one-stop shop to say, go in here, there's a calculator, there's an AI tool that will help you write a disclosure statement, and there's loads of advice sheets and stuff. So, we're trying to do a bit from Offploy's side to help people with that. But I think it needs to be done properly through the criminal justice system and prison and probation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And making sure that it's everywhere as well. The worst, if it's not standardized throughout all of the prisons, throughout all of the release packs, then we have people that fall through the gaps, and we have people that feel underinformed, alone. Like a lot of what, Darren, when you were explaining your situation earlier, just a few minutes ago, feeling like I don't have a choice because I'm doing this alone. And when we don't standardize processes, we have people that do this. So, okay, well, I'm going to act on what I know. So, yeah, Rik, I think it's brilliant what Offploy are doing to try and standardize this and to make these packs that people can, Can you speak a little bit about, this is to either you, Rik, or Darren, can you speak a little bit about what feelings you think prevent people from disclosing their convictions?
The legislation itself. I understand for safeguarding, and employers and the right for employers to know about criminal convictions. But because of the impact of that, regardless of what guidance is out there and regardless of what support, someone might get, they're still having to declare it. So I have a little bit of a challenge personally with the actual legislation itself, where you have to declare it in the first place. You've served your custodial sentence, you've done your time, you're meant to be rehabilitated or partly rehabilitated if you're on licence. So you should be able to go and get jobs on a equal footing to anyone else that's applying. So because my experiences have been that because my convictions are spent now, I don't have to declare them in most cases, as Rik's pointed out, depending on, what job you go for. Some require enhanced DBS. However, when I get offered a position, I do declare them. That automatically, I feel, puts me into from a high flyer bracket that they're lucky to have as an employee to an ex-offender bracket that is a risk potentially. And I can be even now, despite having sort of high-level security clearance for some of the jobs I've worked in, I still have to have an additional sort of an assessment 30 years later. So, like, for me, it's that declaration. And then how do we support people with getting jobs that give them the experience required to get more senior posts and earn more money, because that's why we go to work. But you don't have to declare those jobs in the first place. So and then once your criminal convictions have become spent, you continue to not have to declare them for most jobs. The problem is when they're unspent, that everyone gets out of prison, they're told to go and look for work, and then they have to declare if they want to go to certain jobs, declare their convictions.
Well, there's several points in what you said. I mean, the legislation, you are absolutely right. It is phenomenally complicated because almost every government likes to put its mark on the system and do its own bit of, like the current government just come in. They're doing a crime and policing bill. Just before the general election, there was the Victims and Prisoners Bill. There was the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act not long before that. Every government likes to put its mark on the system, which means that what you say, Darren, is absolutely right. The legislation is so complicated, which is why barristers earn a fortune, and they have even more books behind them than you guys can see I've got at the moment, because it is a nightmare, and no lay individual can possibly completely understand all the implications of different convictions, etc., etc. Having said all of that, what the previous government tried to do was to tidy up and shorten the rehabilitation period, so the periods before which a conviction becomes spent and you don't normally have to disclose it. So in October 23, there were some big changes that really shortened the rehabilitation periods, which meant that many people's convictions become spent a lot earlier, and that change was retrospective. So that was actually quite good news. But there's loads of complications, and I don't want to get too technical, but I'll just give you one example, which is that in every change that's been made, they've never tidied up the law around minor motoring offences, which, it might surprise your listeners, Nick, are technically criminal offences, even though they're not on the Police National Computer, they're on the DVLA. So if you go to prison for 12 months, it's a 12-month rehabilitation period afterwards. If you get 3 speeding points endorsed to your licence, that's a 5-year rehabilitation period. Even though they only count for 3 on totting up and drop off after 4, technically in law, that offence has a 5-year rehabilitation period. So
I did not know that. I guess drawing from both of your experiences, I'd be really keen to hear what you think about how we can create a better environment. So how can we create a better environment where people feel safe, willing, able to disclose this sensitive information? And that's, I guess, employers, but also as a world, how can we create that better environment?
I chip in first on that one. I think it's a huge question, and my magic wand's all out of charge at the moment, unfortunately. But I think all we can continue to do as a sector is to work with employers to enable and encourage them to go further than just ban the box. Ban the box is brilliant as a start, don't get me wrong, but it literally just means I'm not going to ask on the application form. What we need is more employers like Catch-22, like Iceland Foods, other employers out there who say, do you know what, we are going to either have a program. I mean, Pret a Manger have a fantastic Rising Stars program where anybody in one of their disadvantaged groups, including people with criminal convictions, can come on board, get paid for working in a shop for a period of time through their foundation. And at the end of it, if they've turned up and they're really good, they will be offered a job somewhere. We need more employers like that who are actually nailing the colours to the mast and saying we're not going to discriminate against the 25% of people out there that have got some form of criminal conviction. How to get there is tough, but we just have to keep working incrementally to promote that. Where we get good employers, I think it's really good to try to get them even better. So, I mean, I know we're working with Catch 22 at the moment. You're a great employer of people with convictions with a great culture, but helping you do more and go to that next step as well. I think, to try to be positive, Darren's touched on one thing as well, which is that, again, all the evidence shows that the vast majority of people that have got a conviction, when they're given that chance by an employer, are very loyal, very resilient, very grateful to that employer for that opportunity. And surely that's what pretty much every employer wants. They want somebody who's going to turn up regularly on time, do a good job, do a bit extra, and go home a happy bunny that they're actually getting a pay packet. And I just wish we could get to a point where perhaps the government could incentivise people to take people with convictions and give them that chance that they need.
I think that my advice would be that, first of all, reflecting Rik's guidance about it being illegal to not declare unspent convictions, would be that you need to declare them, possibly informally to your potential line manager or the person advertising the vacancy, possibly even after you've had an interview. It depends on when that declaration comes in. So if they ask you as part of the application process, you would need to declare it at that point. If they don't, you probably wouldn't need to declare it until after you receive an offer, if they ask. My recommendation otherwise, though, would be for people with unspent convictions to try to identify positions that don't require declarations of criminal convictions. There's lots of them. As I said in the podcast earlier, I didn't actually know when I didn't declare it that I was breaking the law not declaring it. I was just trying to get a job, and there's lots of evidence that a lot of people are in the same position. But rather than put yourself at risk of any wrongdoing, I would suggest that if you want to go into any specific field, just identify the positions within that field. So if you wanted to do administration or that sort of management, to look for all the jobs that don't require criminal record checks. So really outside public sector is the honest truth. And then gain your experience there. Then when your convictions become spent, you could then go to public sector and wider employers, and you wouldn't need to declare them. I always say, though, that it's still worth declaring it. I'll still declare mine even though they're spent, but only once I get the job offer. So it's then difficult for the employer to withdraw the job offer, particularly with my experience. I suppose that's the advice I'd give on that question, Nick.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And do you feel like there is anything that companies can do, or like hiring managers can do, to create an environment where people feel safer to disclose their convictions?
I think the only thing they could really do, if they were on... See, the difficulty you've got for employers is they get so many applications. So if you've got a pile of 80 applications and then one of those is declaring a criminal conviction, they're probably on the out pile because you've already got strong competition. If, however, you have got employers that are willing to sort of consider criminal convictions, I think they should make it clear that they're open and fair about user experience. So the Ministry of Justice is probably a good example. So it employs people now because it recognises lived experience, adds to policy development and stuff like that. So when you go to the Ministry of Justice, it actually says it proactively employs people with criminal convictions. So if I'll suggest for employers that if they're happy to employ or consider employing people with criminal convictions, that they sort of make that clear. And that would then give reassurance to the person if they've got unspent convictions, then they're not just going to get sifted out.
But that's so much better a playing field, isn't it? When you're like, it's communicated for you, like to you honestly from the start. We're interested in people with lived experience. We believe that those with user experience are an asset to our team. We want to hire you. That creates a completely different playing field to how do I disclose this thing? They're not expecting me to disclose this thing. Do you know what I mean? I love that idea. It like sets the record from the start.
Yeah. And that would mean if all employers that were happy to consider ex-offenders with unspent convictions as potential employees, that would almost help people like myself back in the day to identify the jobs that's worthwhile putting a lot of effort into applying. Because the thing is, when you're an ex-offender, you're trying to get your life back on track. You might have other motivations to, you're going to be earning a lot less money potentially than you could earn if you continue committing crime. You want to go straight. It's already hard work to convince yourself to try and go straight and earn less money than you could and stuff like that. If you've then got a tedious, lengthy application process and at the end of it you're going to get sifted out anyway, at least if you know you're on a fair footing. And now there seems to be much more momentum with recognising the benefits of lived experience across the board now. So actually there's probably a lot more employers that welcome lived experience. Like I said, Ministry of Justice is one. I think the Home Office is moving up that route now as well. So, big government departments, and then they're setting the sort of benchmark for other employers. Because if Ministry of Justice are willing to employ ex-offenders with lived experience, why shouldn't Tesco's? Why shouldn't the tyre shop up the road? So I think it starts nationally by leading with the good practice. But the only reason you'd know that on the Ministry of Justice is if you go for a job on the Ministry of Justice website. They don't advertise it. So perhaps nationally, those government departments that welcome lived experience of offending behaviour and, going through the justice system could maybe advertise that a bit more to other employers, potentially.
Absolutely. And that's a great call to action as well, isn't it? Of like, it has to be trickle down. People follow these big companies and big organisations, services lead. If the Ministry of Justice are doing that, other charities that are subcontracted by the Ministry of Justice are going to go, well, we've got to follow. So I love that, Darren. That's great.
Yeah, the difficulty is when it's unspent, and there's always and I can understand why the law does that, but the difficulty is when it's unspent, you're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. But given Rik's advice earlier on, I suggest that we need to declare it if it's unspent. So the safest bet, if you can't find one of them employers that is advertising, I think the safest bet is to go for an employer that's not requesting a criminal record check. And there's thousands of them.
Thousands, absolutely. And maybe when we release this episode as well, we could put some links into some of these, the places which you can find these jobs and these offerings. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you so much, Darren. I really appreciate your answers today. And Rik, thank you very much as well. It's been lovely talking to you both. And yeah, I'm sure we'll see you on here again soon.
You will. Nice one, Nick. Thank you very much.
Experts by Experience is brought to you by Catch22. For more episodes, visit www.catch-22.org.uk. Now playing on National Prison Radio.